We are hanging out.
Ah, good. Well, it's good to have a hangout because it feels like it's been a while, Tom.
Yeah, we've had about a week and a half gap or something, but on average, I think we're knocking them out about once a week or something.
Yeah. Well, we did 2 last week for sure. So yeah, it's all good. Anyway, how's Tom in the land of snow?
It's actually more looking like ice now at this point. They're talking about temperatures of like -5 or something like that.
Yeah.
And we had a bit of rain, and so outside it's a little bit ice rinky.
Yeah. Oh, that's not good.
There
So
was a massive motorway closure as well.
I heard about that. Yeah, people trapped for 11 hours in the snow.
Yeah.
You know, when I went up to when I went skiing with my family a few weeks ago. Well, when was that? In January now, so more than a few weeks ago. I thought, right, let's just get everything packed up. And so I got loads of food, high energy food like chocolate bars and all this kind of stuff that you normally shouldn't buy. I got loads of chocolate bars. I got loads of peanuts, loads of drinks, all sorts of stuff. And I got a bunch of blankets and some pillows, and I shoved it all in the car, just in case something like that happened. And everyone laughed at me. They all laughed at me, my family. They went, ha, 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 where do you think we're going? To the Arctic? And when we got up to the mountain, there was no snow at all. There was just nothing right until the very top. Right, in fact, where the ski resort is, there was no snow in the ski resort. And the snow literally started at the very edge of the ski resort. And so there's plenty of snow at the top where you were skiing, but none on the way there at all. So I did feel like I'd kind of, been a bit over precautious. But having read about that 11-hour, was it on the M62 near Manchester or something? People trapped for 11 hours in the freezing cold snow. Yeah, I showed that to my family. I went, look, see, that's what can happen. And they were all like, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. So there you are. That all comes from reading my favorite book when I was a little boy. I don't know if you ever read it, but it's the SAS Survival Handbook by somebody, John Wiseman. And I loved that book. I don't know if you've ever come across it or not.
No, I haven't.
Well, it was this really amazing, big fat book, and it had all sorts of survival techniques and things. And it had really nice graphics and pictures and stuff all the way through. It shows you all the poisonous plants in different areas of the world, all the plants that are edible, the kind of what to do if you get attacked by a bear or a shark, how to build traps, how to build shelters, all sorts of stuff, all the kind of things that every schoolboy just sort of like laps up. And I used to sit there poring over these things and soaking it all up. And one of the chapters, each sort of thing was split into different chapters. There's poisonous animals and all sorts. And one of them was called Fill the Bathtub, It's Civil War, which I never forgot. So basically, if there's ever some kind of issue like that, fill the bathtub. A lot of people don't have bathtubs anymore; they just have showers. But if there was a civil war or some kind of plague outbreak or anything horrific like that, you need to keep your own water supply, because as soon as the electricity goes off, the pumps stop, and so does the water. So stuff like that. So it was really cool. But yeah, one of the things is what to do if you're stuck in a car that's broken down in the snow and things like that. So hence my over preparation.
Well, I think you're in the minority in the sense that most people have absolutely no idea how to deal with those things. So I don't think it's a bad idea to know either.
No, I mean, to be honest, I don't really have much of a clue about most of these things. I mean, I've forgotten most of the things in the SAS Survival Handbook. One of the principles of it is the same with Bear Grylls. If you've ever seen his thing, is no matter where he goes, he's always got a knife with him. So the premise is that you're in a plane crash in some of these things. How to survive a plane crash, and all these kind of things. And yet you always have to have a knife. As long as you've got a knife, you can survive. You can build shelter, you can hunt, you can cook, you can do all sorts of stuff. But I mean, who realistically has a knife with them these days?
I'm not sure the legality of that in the UK. I
Wow. You can be sure
Might be
because
worth looking at.
no, you're not allowed to have a knife. The other day, not the other day, a few years ago, my wife said, "Oh, can you go down to I'm not going to mention the name of the shop, but a popular shop and get me a really nice knife. I saw it there, and I was going to buy it, and I forgot it. It's a nice kitchen knife. It's really nice, and it's on offer." So I went, okay, and I wandered around, and I went down to town, and I went to the shop, and I bought this massive knife. And then afterwards, I was walking home with it, and I was thinking, imagine I got mugged now, you know? And what would I do? Would I whip out the knife to protect myself? If I did, would I be breaking the law? You know, it's a weird thing. So, you
You're
know,
not allowed to use it, I don't think, but I think you're allowed to have it. So I think that you would be breaking the law,
you're
but
not allowed to carry a knife over a certain, you know.
they wouldn't be allowed to sell them, would they, if it was illegal? But it's the same
So,
thing with those maglite torch type things.
yeah.
You're allowed to have torches and you're allowed to use them as torches, but as soon as you use them as some sort of weapon, that's breaking the law.
Well, I would need to check this up because it's not something I've really thought about. But I know that you know, until recently in London, there's always been a real problem with knife. In fact, not until recently, including now, there's a huge problem with knife crime, and especially in South London, and there's a kind of a lot of kind of estates where there are sort of a bit of a gang culture there, and on New Year's Eve, I think 11 not 11, sorry, uh, four young men were stabbed to death within, you know, a few minutes of each other in completely unrelated attacks, which I thought was horrific. And I think there were 11 attacks at the same on New Year's Eve alone in London, knife attacks, but four people were killed, which is just such a waste of life. And so I'm because it was such a big thing, I'm pretty sure that there is a zero tolerance for carrying a knife in the UK. But like you say, I mean, maybe the way to get around that, if you were terrified and needed to have some kind of the feel of having that protection, if you went to the shop and you had a receipt, you know, and you bought a knife, then you'd be okay. But I mean, you know, you can't go to the shop and buy a knife every time and walk around with it and like, I'm just taking it out. But that would be one way. You know, when I was just taking it home. I happened to. It
I've
happened
been
when I
on my
got
way
home.
home for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah,
The
it's been a
receipt.
long. It's been this cold snow, and I got lost in a snowstorm, and I survived because I had my knife. You know, just like Bear Grylls always tells me.
I did do a little bit of research on self-defense. I think within the UK and within law, it was a while ago now, but it was one of those things where it suddenly occurred to me because of the gun debate that goes on in the US.
Yeah.
And how it's all about, you know, if you take away people's guns, how they're going to defend themselves type thing. And I think, well, what kind of things can we use in the UK to defend ourselves if we wanted something? And there's not much. There's what I did stumble upon was these little they're like really small torches, but they're very, very bright, and you press a little button on them and they like sort of they're sort of like strobe lights. So you let's say someone's about to attack you or whatever, and you pull out your torch, and it's very, very compact. It's like the size of a magic marker or a you know, chunky ink pen. And you push the button, and it strobe lights in this person's face, and you wouldn't be able to see anything. You can't look at it, and then theoretically, that allows you to I don't know, make your getaway in the time between, you know.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a bit like, I think in the British Army they have something similar. They have some kind of laser that they fire at fighter planes or bombers that are coming overhead, and it blinds the the idea is anyway to blind the pilot temporarily, which is pretty horrific because then he's going to either have his plane on autopilot, I guess, and he'll be all right, or he's going to crash. But I guess that's the point, isn't it? Yeah, that's if it works for them, I can understand. I can understand the logic of that. The other thing about it is, if say you were in a dark street and someone did mug you, and you suddenly whacked on this strobe, not only would it sort of be very disorientating and sort of temporarily maybe blind or confuse the attacker, but also it would draw a lot of attention to you from everybody who happened to be nearby.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good idea.
I got a weird YouTube recommendation on our account, because I don't use our sort of YouTube profile to watch videos in. I've got separate profiles for that. So it brings up like popular videos that people watch.
Yeah.
Like in terms of crime related. This one came up, which is like, watch an Apple store get robbed in 12 seconds.
Oh my God.
And I'll put it in the comments below. And like, it's you should have a watch of it whilst we're online, because it's sort of weird in the sense that it starts off like, this is an Apple store in San Francisco, and these 3 guys walk in, and within seconds they are, because one of the things I was going to say about this was, I used to work in a bank, and they have all these safety protocols about you know, what happens if someone decides to go in the bank and rob it. And that involves having only a certain amount of money in the drawers. So like, the majority of the money is in a safe, so you know, in the back. So if someone wants to make a quick getaway, they can't sort of go into the back safe. They only take the money or rob the money which is in the front safes. And so you limit that amount of money to a certain amount. If you think about like these Apple stores and how much money theoretically, if you were to sell all these devices, is just sitting there on the tables, which never occurred to me before, but obviously it's occurred to people that have decided to rob these stores.
Yeah, if you've got that kind of mindset.
They walk in within seconds, and within supposedly 12 seconds, they've walked out with thousands of dollars worth of stuff. And everyone who is not robbing the place is basically standing in the same position, just sort of, what the hell's going on? One second I'm thinking about buying an iPhone, and the next second I'm in the middle of a robbery.
Yeah, they just rush in.
Don't
they have like cords or something that attach?
Yeah, you can see like all the cords still attached to the items until they decide to run out the doors, and then they all sort of, I don't know, pop out. The thing that I thought was funny was when they walk in, they decide to start by stealing the things which are closest to them, and then they're picking up stuff and getting further away from the door rather than starting the furthest the door and then getting closer to the door so that they can make their getaway easier. That was one of the funny things.
Yeah, you're right. That's really illogical. Why wouldn't they do that? And also, I would imagine, like you said with the bank, that it would make sense to have the more expensive items near the back of the store. I mean, you know, it's if you go into a supermarket, where is the booze aisle? Where's all the alcohol? Vodka and not vodka necessarily, but you know, really expensive bottles of port and sherry and whiskey especially, and all of these things are usually as far away from the door as possible. So,
but within the video, it says 4 days later, the same thing happened again.
To the same store.
To the same store, yeah. So they filled up the stuff again, and 4 days later, 4 other guys walked in and just, you know, smash and grab. And at the end of the video, it says $100,000 of merchandise was stolen from this store, and they're still searching for the suspects.
That's insane. Well, you'd have thought, what, do they have like balaclavas on or something?
Just hoods.
Hoods, yeah. Well, I don't know if you heard about this, but there was a sort of a landmark legal case in the UK, because what do you do if a burglar comes into your house in the middle of the night? You know, and the problem is that a burglar has got human rights the same as you, but the burglar has the ability to know what they're going to do. They've probably already got a criminal record. A lot of them, they probably come from a kind of hard area. Maybe they're not even, you know, maybe they're drunk or on drugs. Maybe they're not. But in any case, you don't know. You wake up in the middle of the night and you hear someone in your living room or whatever. So what do? You creep downstairs, and then what happens if you confront one of the burglars? Well, very often
There's
burglars.
been so many comedy sketches on this topic.
Oh, well, the thing is, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you do, because in the UK, in the US, I believe you're allowed to shoot someone to defend yourself. And usually people have got guns, right? Which comes back to this gun law thing.
I think there's a litigation issue around that. So I've heard about I think the law is, I don't know about the law, but I've heard about the fact that someone had been robbing and they actually ended up suing that person for some sort of damages, and they actually won. But I've also heard many stories in the UK. There was a professional footballer that was involved, and they punched the robber or something, and ended up bringing charges and actually won. So yeah, I think sorry for cutting you off. You're actually about to say that there's a law which protects robbers from people who are in their homes.
It's basically, it seems to be fairly even, you know, because ultimately, when it comes to the law, it doesn't take a holistic view of anything, you know. In fact, specifically, you're supposed to, if you're a juror, not that I've ever been in a jury, and but as a member of the jury, you're supposed to take disregard, you know, previous misdemeanors and all the rest of it, and just focus on the actual crime that's being tried. And so ultimately, there's no holistic view. You know, you're trying someone for a particular thing. So the police charge you with whatever it may be, or maybe multiple things, but it's to do with that particular incident, and then you're tried on it. And so when you're a burglar and you get beaten up in someone's house, you then sue them for I don't know, GBH, or, you know, battering or whatever it may be, and that has to be tried separately from the burgling issue, which is just bizarre because, you know, in my mind, I mean, I understand that, you know, someone could come into your house, you know, for example, a Jehovah's Witness comes into your house and then you claim that he was a burglar and you beat him up because you don't like what he's saying, and therefore, you know, it's not as black and white as all that, but the fact is that if someone burgles their house, I mean, there must be, that is the overriding crime. And if you were there and you've got your family, you've got 2 small children, I've got 2 small children, and you as the father have, I don't know about you, but whenever I've heard like a noise or something in the night, I just suddenly, the adrenaline's pumping and I'm out of bed and I can't sleep, and I'm listening to the little noises until I'm confident that it's quieting down. I tend to lie there in bed for a while and don't make any noise whatsoever until I can't hear any more noise, you know. So whatever it might have been, it could have been a neighbor next door or someone, you don't know what it is, but I tend to sort of stay put and listen acutely until I can't hear any more noise. And at that point, I get out of bed and I check the whole house systematically from one side to the next. And until I've done that, I can't sleep. So that's what I do. And I don't do it all the time, but I do it from time to time. And in Spain recently, there was an attempted burglary in the village where I'm living in, which is very unusual. There's really low level of crime here, generally speaking. But there was one a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. So it's kind of put me on edge a little bit. If I was a dog, I'd have my hairs on the back of my neck up. So, but what do? You know, if there was someone in your house, what would you do? Because you and I, Tom, you know, we might think, well, I must try and protect my family. And so you don't know whether they've got a knife or some other kind of weapon. So you're not going to go to them with just your hands. You're going to have to pick up the nearest kind of weapon that you can find, just to defend yourself. And that's perfectly normal. You're defending your family, you're defending your house. I think you've got a perfect right to do that. And then when you go downstairs, and there he is, the burglar. I mean, obviously the most important thing of all is to give them an access point so that they can actually get out, in my opinion. So if I came downstairs to the living room, I wouldn't want to block them into a corner. I want to make sure that they could run out the door. because I wouldn't want to have a fight. But the last thing I think you should be worrying about in those circumstances is the fact that you could get prosecuted, because I don't think you should have to worry about that at all. I think the concern should be the onus, because I think it's unfair, right? Because you're a law-abiding citizen with a job and a family and everything else, and then but for absolutely nothing to do with anything you've ever done, you find yourself in a situation where it's potentially life or death, and you didn't know you were going to be in that situation. You've got no training, no preparation for it, and suddenly you find yourself in that situation, and the last thing you should have to worry about is, should I hit him hard enough to hurt him, but not hard enough to kill him, or so that I'm not going to get fined? You shouldn't have to worry about it. I think you should be able to just defend yourself with impunity, because at the same time, this person knew that they were going to come in there. They knew the risk. They have probably got some kind of weapon, and they're absolutely going to try and do anything to get out of the situation, because they know that if you capture them or hurt them to the point where they can't escape, then they're going to go to prison. So it's not a level playing field at all. In fact, it's massively in the favor of the burglar. So I think that the playing field needs to be leveled.
It's an incentive. It's almost an incentive to rob, isn't it? But
it is, and it's an incentive.
You're supposed
to fight.
If I'm not wrong, I think you're supposed to restrain them. So basically, the robber, I presume, has already broken the law and probably doesn't mind breaking the law. So you could get hit, but you're only allowed to restrain them.
It's nonsense, isn't it?
It's nonsense. It's a tricky one though, because I mean, you picked up on one thing there, which I think is worth highlighting, and that is most people are not prepared enough in order to deal with that type of situation, even though it's a situation that happens regularly, and you hear about it all the time.
Yeah,
happened to a member of my family not so long ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And actually, the person did get prosecuted because they left they smashed glass in order to get into the property, and they left some blood behind, and that blood was run, and believe it or not, they actually knew the person, and the person went to court, and then they went to prison. Wow. Which is, as far as I'm aware, is quite rare. It doesn't happen very often.
I don't think it does. But I will tell you something that I've learned. Whether it's true or not, you should always tell them that there is a burglary in progress. And the reason is because the police have got, I mean, ideally, you want your burglary to be right at the very end of the month. and you want to tell them that it's in progress, because the police have got an incentive. They've got, like everyone, a quota, and they've got targets. So they want to capture and prosecute as many people as possible. At the end of the month, if unless there's been a crime spree and they're just like, yeah, I don't care, I've already met my quota, then they probably haven't met their target, and so they're going to be desperate to try and capture this person. I think that's just hearsay. I don't really know that that's the truth, but I can tell you from personal experience, the only time I've ever actually found myself in the situation, or similar situation to the one we were describing earlier, it was when I was sharing a flat with a friend of mine on the seafront in Brighton many years ago, and we were sitting there, and a friend of mine who's from Canada but had been living in America had come over, and it was just me and my friend, and we were sitting there in the living room, and I remember we watched a French film called La Haine, which means the hatred or the hate, which is a really good film about social inequality and how the police, well, I won't go into that, but anyway. So we were sitting there, and my friend from Canada who lives in America, and we got talking about crime, because there's a lot of crime in La Haine. And I said, why is there so much crime in the US? What is it about, the guns and this, that, and the other? And at that precise moment, before he could answer, I heard this massive smashing sound. It was about 11 o'clock at night or thereabouts. And I heard this huge smashing sound. So I went out onto the balcony and I looked out, because I heard it come from that way. And there was a drunk person staggering down the road, obviously just been to the pub. And I'm not going to say his exact words because it was extremely rude. But he said, "Here, mate, some has just broken into the flat downstairs." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, he's in there now. You should call the old Bill and get him arrested." And so I thought, okay, good words, I shall do that. So I phoned the police and I said, "Yeah, there's a burglary in progress." No, I said that there's a robbery going on. The flat downstairs is being burgled. And they said, "Oh yeah, and when did this occur?" And I said, "Well, it's happening right now. They're in there at this moment." And she suddenly woke up from like being uninterested. The woman who answered it, she said, "You mean the burglar's in there right now?" And I said, "Yes." 2 minutes later, the whole place was surrounded by police. There were 5 police vehicles, 1 dog unit, and there was just no getting out of it. That was it. And the police had this thing, the loudspeaker, and they said, "You have 2 minutes to come out of, or 1 minute to come out of the flat. Otherwise, we're sending the dogs in." And then they had this sort of baton thing. They smashed the front door in, and then suddenly I heard this noise from outside the window. So from the back side of the house, so from the rear of the house. So I went there, and it was my friend who wasn't there at the time, Miles. I think you know Miles. That was his room, and he was in London, and he had a baseball bat right by his bed. And I heard this noise, and I looked out the window, and there was the burglar climbing up the drain pipe towards the window. And I thought, oh my God, what do I do now? There's the police on scene, and they've broken into the flat downstairs to get this guy. There's dogs barking. There's no way that the dog's going to be able to get him because he's climbing up the drain pipe. And there's only one place he can possibly go, and that is into Miles's bedroom, where I currently was cowering with the baseball bat in my hand. And I made a split decision. I said, that guy's not getting into this house. And I held the baseball bat up, and rather foolishly, I should have warned him. I should have said, "Mate, I've got a baseball bat, and you ain't coming in here. I'm going to whack you right on the head." Funny how my accent changed slightly when I said that. But anyway, I didn't. I just waited for him, and I wasn't going to warn him. I didn't know what was going on because I wasn't in my, the adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I wasn't in my normal state of rational thinking. I was in sort of fight or flight mode, and I was definitely in fight mode because there was no flight. So there I was with the baseball bat, and I would have killed him. I'm sure of it, because he was like on the second. He would have been 1 story up, so he'd have been what, 12, 15 feet above the ground, above a concrete courtyard, and I'd have whacked him right on the head with a baseball bat, and he would have fallen 15 feet. I mean, he may not have died, but he would have been in a serious state. And funny enough, he wouldn't even have been inside the building. So I could have been in very serious trouble for that. But luckily, the drain pipe gave way under his weight, and he crashed down there on his own and got arrested. So, and the weird thing was, when he was climbing up, I could see that he had no nose. The guy had literally no nose. And I heard later on, because he got arrested and sent to prison for 4 years, turns out that he'd just been released from Lewes prison that very day. And the only thing he'd done is he'd come into Brighton on the train, and he had somehow managed to score a load of heroin. And then he desperately needed some more. So he was, at 11 o'clock at night in central Brighton, which is a very busy place at the best of times, literally 5 minutes walk from the main police station in the city. And there he was. He decided to break into a flat, on the main street where plenty of people could see him, to try and get a bit of money so he could buy some more drugs. So that's my experience of this. And I can tell you that my next door neighbors, my downstairs neighbors who were away at the time, they got a phone call from the police saying what had happened. They thought I walked on water. I was their absolute out and out hero. They even came to my wedding in Spain, and they never had a bad thing to say about me. They were like, "Oh, Jake," and they said to my wife, "Oh, you've married such a good guy. Did you know he's a hero?" And all I did was find the police, but it could have ended up very, very differently if I'd have hit him. So that's the only experience I've ever had with it, and I hope that that's the only experience I will ever have with it. But the truth is, you never know, do you? So
it's a cool story.
yeah, well, it is cool because it had a happy ending. Well, at least for me, not for the guy.
Yeah, it does remind me of sort of what I said about the people coming in and then stealing things that are closest to the door, and then gradually stealing things that get further and further away from the door. In the sense that this person has decided, instead of going to the biggest houses that are possibly empty, decided to burgle a place which is essentially a flat which is in a high populated area.
Yeah,
they don't do too much thought about these things before they
no, it's bizarre. Yeah, it was really weird, wasn't it? I mean, oh, did I tell you why he had no nose?
Well,
Apparently,
you go on anyway.
Apparently he had it bitten off in a prison fight.
Okay, I wasn't going to go with that. I thought you were going to say something cocaine related, but
oh no, I think yeah. Well, I heard that he had it bitten off in a prison fight because the police told us. I mean, I don't know if they were supposed to or not, but I can tell you what, there was a policewoman standing by the door the police paid for someone to come in and fix the door, and it happened that same night. And until people came to fix the door, a policewoman stood guard at the door, and I got speaking to her because at that time I smoked. It was a terrible habit, but I smoked, and I went and gave her a cigarette, and we both had a cigarette together, and she was over the moon about capturing this guy.
Another thing I was going to say was because you said that she suddenly perked up, the person you were speaking to, when you said it was in progress. I think a lot of these things happen, and if the robber or the burglar has gone, there's very little chance of catching them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, they were so happy, the police. You can't imagine. They were just It was this woman. She was glowing. She was happy to stand there at the door, and she was happy to have a cigarette and talk about how fantastic it was to have caught this guy. And so there you go. That's what happened. But I did hear a story about another guy who, I think, as I was saying earlier, he had a similar experience. He lived on a farm in Norfolk. And, you know, it's a long time since I've even thought of this. I had no idea that we were going to be talking about burglary today and whatsoever. So, you know, no preparation. But this is a story that I found interesting at the time. And it probably happened maybe 15 years ago or so. And there was a guy in Norfolk who lived in a farm, and he was all alone. He was sort of middle-aged, a bit of a loner, and there he lived in his big old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, really. And one day, one evening, some burglars came in and they robbed him. And you know, he was really upset about it, and you know, felt very vulnerable and scared in his own house from that moment onwards. Anyway, he claimed on the insurance, and you know, a month or so later, he had a new TV, and everything that had been stolen had been replaced. And then a week later, or a few weeks later, the burglars returned to steal all the new stuff, because that's apparently something that they do. So if you've been robbed once, it's very likely, because they already know where everything is in the house, and they know what kind of level of valuables you're going to have and all sorts. So anyway, they decided to come back. Only this time he was waiting for them, because he was terrified of being all alone on his own in the house, miles away from anyone, no neighbors or anything. And he had, being a farmer, he had a shotgun, and he had the shotgun upstairs with him. And when he heard the people break in, he came down the stairs, saw them in his hallway, and shot them. And he shot one of them right in the chest, and that guy died instantly. And the other guy got some shot in him, but managed to run away. He later got obviously caught, because it turns out that it was his brother or someone who'd been killed. And they were, unbelievably, this pair were career burglars from Liverpool. And I don't know if you know the geography of the UK that much, but Liverpool is hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Norfolk. And so these guys had pinpointed that house and spent hours driving all the way to Norfolk from Liverpool, specifically to rob him, and then go all the way back again. And I couldn't believe that. I mean, like you said, the other guy was, he was lazy and he just tried to rob the first place when the idea came to him, by the looks of things. But these guys, they were completely the opposite. These people didn't rob their local area. They targeted people literally hundreds of miles away. And they were known burglars, but I guess by targeting people so far away, the police wouldn't, they wouldn't be looking for them, unless they left some kind of evidence. They wouldn't have found them. But I was blown away by that, if you pardon the pun. But what was interesting was that the guy was then tried for murder because he'd killed someone, and they said he'd done it on purpose. And he claimed that he hadn't done it on purpose. And then they were saying, well, it's about the angle of the shot and where the gun had been. So basically, it turns out that if you are being burgled, you've got to have a weapon that has a reasonable reason to be there. So if you happen to be in the kitchen, it's okay for you to pick up a kitchen knife to defend yourself with. He claimed that he had the shotgun at the bottom of the stairs in the hallway. And as he came down, he saw them and he grabbed the shotgun, and it was just, he was terrified, so he shot, and that's what happened. But they claimed that he had the shotgun as he came down the stairs, and he shot from halfway up the stairs, and therefore it's murder. So, I mean, you'll have to look up for yourself if you're interested, the outcome of this. But I can tell you something, regardless of whether it was murder or not, you have to rely on a jury of 12 people to find you guilty. And it's going to be hard. You're going to be hard pressed to find people who are going to put their emotions to the side and say, yeah, this guy didn't deserve that, and this guy's defending his house. He deserves to go to prison for murder. Because to be honest, I'm not sure how I would react, but if I was a juror, it would be very hard for me to put aside my feelings that that guy, had been victimized twice by these people. And he was living in fear for his life, and he defended himself, and that's the outcome. And I can't really find myself to be that upset about the outcome for these robbers. I don't know about you.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because what you could say is that he could have used a weapon which was less lethal. So I think there's such a thing as, like, I don't know how easy it is to get hold of these types of things, but there's like plastic bullets or rubber bullets, more, not plastic, which disable but don't kill. Or he could have shot him in the legs, which is what I think every time I hear about a police officer who kills when, I don't know, there's a person who pulls out their wallet or something, and they think that they've got a gun. And so they shoot them and they die, and it makes me think, well, why didn't you just shoot him in the legs?
But you could still hit an artery and he'd bleed out. But yes, you wouldn't want to get shot in the leg, would you? But
you certainly wouldn't. But I would say it's far less likely to die than you would be if someone shoots you in the chest, like where all your vital organs are.
No, not wrong. I don't know. I mean, I think in this particular instance, the one I'm talking about, okay, first of all, the farmer, and secondly, myself with the baseball bat, I can tell you I know now with a clear head that if he'd come, I should warn him that he's not going to get in, I'm going to attack him. Then I don't know legally what that would mean, whether that would implicate me even more, I don't know. But my thought is that if you were climbing up a drain pipe and there was a guy standing there with a baseball bat at the top, you'd be inclined to stop climbing up the drain pipe. But I mean, who knows? But in case of this guy, I think the problem was not that the guy got killed or that he was shot. It was, like you say, it was the use of the weapon itself, and why he had the weapon in a place you wouldn't expect someone to have a shotgun. And he claimed that it had been at the bottom of the stairs, which is a reasonable place, by the door, where if you're a farmer, you just leave it. But and so the defense was all of the, well, the I guess the not the defense. What's the other one? Anyway, he was yeah, he basically either had the gun and he grabbed the first thing that came to hand when he saw the burglars. His defense was that he came downstairs, heard the burglars, and grabbed the first thing that he could, which happened to be the shotgun. And it wasn't his intention to kill them, but in the heat of the moment, he was terrified and he just did that naturally. And they were claiming that he did it on purpose, and he had the gun upstairs with him, and it was his intention to come down and shoot them. And so this is how it goes. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how the outcome, because I think if you're interested, you should find out for yourself, because it's so long since I heard about this, but I can't rightly recall all the details, although I do remember the outcome. But in any case, what happens is that if you are burgled and you're upstairs and you've got a kitchen knife, you're in trouble. If you're in the kitchen and you use a kitchen knife to defend yourself, you're okay. As long as you don't, on purpose, use lethal force. And the idea is, I think as I understand it, it's you're allowed to defend yourself. And I can't remember the exact terminology, but you're allowed to defend yourself with an appropriate use of force. And the problem with that is, who knows what appropriate is, and that's the sort of grey area about it. But having a kitchen knife in your bedroom it basically looks like you always had the idea to use it, and therefore, you kind of had that in mind. And if there was a burglar and he came into your bedroom and you got a kitchen knife, then you were always planning to use that. So I think that it's the intent, I think, which is the big issue. And my friend Miles, he had a baseball bat next to his bed, so he obviously
liked baseball.
He loved baseball.
He liked playing baseball in his room.
Yeah, I've often heard that thud, thud, thud of the ball against the wall. Kept me up at night because he just couldn't stop playing that baseball. So that's what happens. I used to do Aikido, and I would like to take it up one day because it's an amazing sport, and I know you tried it. But I bought the bokken, which is like the wooden sword, and the jo, which is a staff, like a big wooden pole, and I trained to use these things. So even having trained in self-defense or martial arts, you could say is intent at some point. But I used to keep the jo and things in my bedroom, in my wardrobe, because I had kept my Aikido clothing there, and I also kept the poles next to the Aikido clothing. So I must admit that when I'd heard some of these things, I'd get this weapon out, and I would and I would sort of, like I said, I'd be very quiet, and then when I did get out of bed, after I was fairly sure that there was nothing to worry about, only then would I start creeping around, and I'd go to the door, and I'd stay right, not behind the door in case somebody opened it, but right to the side of the door, listening intently with my Aikido weapon, which is wood, so it's not deadly necessarily, although in the right hands it certainly could be. Yeah, and that's what I did. So I mean, it's you never know. It could be this very night where you get somebody who victimizes you and decides to burgle your house. So I guess it's kind of important to know what you can and what you cannot do to defend yourself. But I certainly think that you should have the right to not worry about the consequences that happen to the burglar, because the burglar, in my view, has literally got zero right to be in your house. So anyway, I don't know. Have you never had any experience with these firsthand?
I have actually, but it was in relation to you still with me?
I'm with you, but you did go very quiet. I don't know. if that was on my end or your end.
Okay. I think that may have been my internet connection, but I think my screen sharing's gone a bit. That doesn't matter. We'll just carry on. What I was going to say was, so they put some stuff in the air conditioning, and it means that you you sleep more than you otherwise would do, and it means that they get to creep around the place and you don't wake up because you have the equivalent of sleeping pills.
Yeah, I heard of that.
And yeah, they took all the cash out of wallets. They took, things, and you don't wake up until the morning and they're already gone. So that's something I've experienced.
Wow, that's kind of terrifying, really, isn't it? It's very sinister. So when did that happen to you? Where were you?
I was in Spain, believe it or not.
Really? Was it quite recent that this happened to you then, Tom? Because I've heard of this happening, and I've heard of it happening in Spain, actually.
Not recent.
Well, a lot of villas in Spain get targeted, and they often have big dogs. Spanish people tend to like really small dogs or really big dogs, and the big dogs are usually sort of semi-wild and run around their property, and they usually have walled properties with a big ferocious dog in it that woofs a lot, and, or several dogs sometimes, and you hear them barking all night long, and they're horrific. And it's just one of the things with Spain, that you just get used to hearing dogs barking all the time. And I've heard of people obviously putting sleeping pills in bits of meat and then throwing the meat over the wall, and the dog obviously finds the meat, eats it, and falls asleep. And then they come in, and then they, as you say, they put something in the air conditioning or something. So I've definitely heard of that, but I know it happened to one of my ex-bosses when I used to work in Spain. That happened to them, but I'd never realized that happened to you. That's kind of sinister.
Yeah. And no, I got no story to tell other than that. I'm afraid it's not as interesting as your story. Just that it ended up with no cash at the end of it.
Yeah, well, that's not good. Were you with your family or with friends?
Both, yeah, and they lost all their cash as well.
Oh my goodness! And your cards presumably as well.
Cards didn't go, actually. I think they were just, I don't know what the rationale behind that is. Maybe that they just didn't make use of the cards or wouldn't make use of the cards. They just wanted the cash. Probably something to do with the fact that we weren't natives. And so, tourists are quite an easy target with respect to carrying too much cash or...
Yeah, absolutely. Is it with the hire cars as well? You see them at the airport. People they come out and they've got a hire car and they get in their car, and then in Spain, in around Barcelona in particular, there were a gang of people pretending to be police cars, believe it or not, and they'd pull you over, and then while one of them is getting all your documents and checking all the documents, the other one just comes in, opens the boot, and robs your car.
Yeah, I've heard another airport one where they say, they sort of ask this question to many people. So if I carry your bags for you, will you pay me €1 or something like that? And as soon as you accept, they run, they run away. So it's a less intelligent one, but still one which I think it may have been common in South Africa or something like that, but literally just give me your bag and I'll run away with it.
Well, do you know, talking about South Africa, when I was working years ago, and I was working with you, in fact, in a large multinational company, I went up to London one day to do a first aid course. We had someone in the office, if you remember, who suffered from epilepsy. He had really bad epileptic fits, on average once or twice a month, and they were really, really quite violent. And he would come out of the fits, usually having had banged his head on the desk on the way down, and he would convulse. And then at the end of it, he would sort of come out of it and have not a clue as to where he was. I mean, each epilepsy is kind of, there's so many different types of epilepsy. I know you know about it. But this guy, he's a lovely guy, big, strong guy. And he would be kind of rightly kind of disorientated and scared. And the first thing he'd want to do is get to his feet. But at the time when he'd be trying to get to his feet, he would have no, he'd be like someone who's drunk ridiculous amount of alcohol. He couldn't stand up on his own. He would fall over and bang himself again. And so it got to the point where we needed sort of 3 or 4 first aiders to sort of kind of not constrain him, but to try and stop him from falling over. And then he would get violent because he was scared. What was going on? Why are you holding my arms? So it was kind of quite a stressful thing for everybody, not just for him. It must have been horrific for him, but also for the people who came to his aid. And when I had to do the first aid course refresher, I asked specifically about what to do with epileptic fits because of the situation that was happening regularly. And they said, oh, when they fall on the floor, you've got to make sure that there's nothing in their mouth, that there's nothing around them that can hit them. And then when they recover, then they can just get up and check that they haven't got any injuries, and then they'll probably be okay. If they've been unconscious for a certain period of time, or if it's an unusual occurrence, then you should phone an ambulance and get them to go and see a doctor. But otherwise, if it's regular and it's something that they're used to, then that's fine. But that's not the case, because he would get up, be desperate to get to his feet, have no idea where he was, and he would be violent because he'd be scared. And if you let him go, he would just keep getting up and falling over. I know because we tried it. And the other thing is, there was another first aider called Mark, who's a big, strong guy, and he tried to sort of, he knew a bit of sort of martial arts, and he tried to sort of, I think he was what do you call it, part-time policeman, special constable, and he used the techniques that they used to keep people on the floor. And I thought that was it did the trick, but it was inappropriate, because there's no need to constrain him that much. We just wanted to sort of hold his arms until he was able to keep his balance. But he literally had no idea who we were or where he was. And he just wanted, it's the fight and flight, again, that we've already mentioned, which reminds me, we haven't got a word of the day today. So maybe...
I have one, but I think it's a little late in the day.
It is a bit. But anyway, he would... he'd try and run off, and he had no balance, and he would crash into things and stuff. So that was the thing. So I said, we need to have a more specific, more detailed course. So we went up to London, where they had a special half-day course on dealing with different types of epilepsy. And it was a really good thing to have done, because you never know when you need to come to someone's... I mean, I'm no longer a first aider, but I will always use my skills, and have used my skills on anyone that I come across who needs them. So I'm really pleased I did it. That was a sort of long way to sort of tell you what happened, because I was going to talk about South Africa. My cousin lived in Johannesburg and was over in London that very day by complete chance. So after the course, we arranged to meet up. And one of the guys that came on the course with me, he was from South Africa, from Johannesburg as well. And we got talking, and I asked him, how long have you been in England? And he said, since he was about 18. And I said, well, what made you decide to come here? And he said, one day, my parents were out, and I was a teenager, and I was in the house with my sister. And it was in the middle of the day, and I was in the house with my sister and my maid, because a lot of them have maids there. And these burglars came in, and they shot me, and they raped my sister and my maid in front of me while I lay dying on the floor. And luckily, afterwards, they left, and the ambulance came and saved his life. Luckily, the gunshot wound was not in a particularly, no organs or anything. And so he survived. And he said after that, he had enough of South Africa, and he's been in England ever since. And I thought that was a horrific story. And he told me that just before we went to the course. We did the course, and straight away after the course, I met my cousin, and he told me they're moving from South Africa. And I said, "Oh, really? Why are you moving from South Africa?" And he said, "Well, what happened recently is that we were out because he has 2 kids, and they went out, and their maid was in the house, and some burglars came in the middle of the day and raped their maid." And they said, this, and I couldn't believe it, because I've just heard the same story from 2 completely separate people who don't know each other, who lived in South Africa, had exactly the same experience. And it was quite a shock, because, they said, imagine we'd have been in the house, they'd have raped, they probably would have shot me, and they would have raped my wife, and, they might have shot my kids, my sons, who knows, So I can't imagine that they're the same set of burglars who did that. I just think there's a pretty horrible crime epidemic in South Africa. So,
yeah, we're quite lucky to be in developed countries that we are, but obviously there's still issues, but there are much worse issues in other places.
Yeah, no, not wrong. I mean, to be in Syria, for example, would definitely not be a good thing for your health right now. So yeah, I mean, we are lucky. I mean, when it comes to developed world, of course, we've been talking about these things, and we've been skirting the elephant in the room, and that is the USA and their gun laws. I mean, how many? A couple of years ago, when France had those 3 horrible terrorist attacks happen, and everyone felt really bad for France. I mean, they'd gone through not 1, not 2, but 3 terrorist attacks in 1 year, horrific ones. And then later in the year, I realized that shortly after that, there was another terrorist attack in California. And it turns out that the way that they classify sort of massacres or mass shootings, gun-related murders, or some kind of terrorist attack, in the USA, it's more than 2 people are shot, or it might be more than 3, and that's considered a mass shooting. And on average, it happens once every day in the USA. And on several occasions, you're talking about, in excess of 10 or 15 people murdered in one go. And just this year, in February, in fact, halfway through February, there'd already been 8 mass shootings in schools in the USA. And these figures just blow my mind away. I mean, I know that in Baltimore, there's an average of 2 gun-related murders a day. At least that's the statistic that they used to be throwing around. And Baltimore is a city roughly the same size as Brighton. But it just blew my mind. Apparently in New Zealand, which is a population of about 4 million or less than 4 million, they have a much higher instance of violence there. But usually the violence is punch-ups where people have been drunk or something like this. Whereas in the USA, most violence is gun-related, because most people have got guns. And I even heard stories, I mean, I guess they're all mostly anecdotal from people, but there are stories of women who have a gun for their own protection in their handbag. And there was one story in particular that I heard, which was that a woman was going to her house. She'd parked the car outside her house, and she was just walking to her front door, and it was nighttime. And someone came to ask her direction. Somebody had been driving along, got lost, seen her park her car. So they'd parked, and they'd walked up to her to ask directions. And she whipped out her gun and shot them dead there on her front door. And that was just pure panic. And another one which is commonly talked about is this family had a teenage daughter, and the teenage daughter, I think they were living in New York or somewhere, and the teenage daughter was supposed to stay at a friend's house, and the parents went out to have a nice meal and maybe go to the theater or something. But the friend was ill, and so the daughter came back, and as a prank, she was a teenager, she thought she'd spook her parents. So she hid in their closet and waited for them, probably tittering with laughter for them to come back. Anyway, when they came back, it was nighttime, and their father and mother had a nice drink, a nice pleasant evening. They weren't drunk, but they, they weren't entirely sober. Anyway, they heard a noise coming from upstairs. So the husband got his gun out of his gun cabinet and crept upstairs, obviously adrenaline pumping through his mind. He is assuming that the house was entirely free of anyone. And you know where this story's going. Basically, he looked in the wardrobe, saw this shape in there, and his reaction was to shoot. And he shot his daughter and killed her. I think she died 3 days later or something. So this is what happens with guns. And this is what happens with people, I guess, who have access to guns, because, we were talking about burglary and suspected burglary. And in this case, it was a tragic, tragic incident, which destroyed everyone's life entirely. I mean, he went to prison, his daughter died, and the wife never got over it. So it's a horrific, horrific experience. But it simply would not have happened if he didn't have a gun. And it just amazes me. You hear people saying guns don't kill people. People do. People without guns rarely kill people. It's not easy. I mean, there are instances where, you punch someone and they die or something. But generally speaking, if you don't have a weapon in your hand, it's not easy to kill someone. And you're not, it isn't something that's likely to happen by accident. So, the country in the world with by far the worst gun crime, and also by far the largest percentage of their population in prison, is the USA. And I don't know if those two facts are related or not, but I think it amazed me when, I think it was George Bush, and there was another mass murder that happened in another school in America during his time, and he said something like, "We will do all we can to find a way of stopping these things from happening." And I just thought, well, it's very obvious to anyone in the world that the reason these things are happening is because people have got guns. I mean, the problem is how to get rid of the guns from society. But just by, if we ignore the sort of corrupting influence of the National Rifle Association, they're obviously very powerful. The guns industry in the US is obviously makes a lot of money, and so there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to outlaw guns. But even the right to bear arms, I'm pretty sure it was an amendment to their constitution. So America has a written constitution, but it's okay to amend the constitution when it suits the right people. So why is it not okay to amend it back? But I guess all I'm trying to say, it's pretty clear which side of the argument that I'm on, and I think it's the side that most rational people are on, is that guns should not be readily available to people, because a gun is designed for one purpose, and that's for shooting. And if there is a gun, then sooner or later it's going to get shot. It's not designed to light up a room or, to play nice music or anything like that. It's designed to shoot a bullet. And therefore, there's no reason to have one. We've been talking about defending yourself. And we also talked about a guy in the UK who had a shotgun, and used it to defend himself. And then, he went to court because of it. But generally, I think that, I like to know that when my burglar's coming into the house, it's unlikely that they've got a gun. Whereas I imagine in the US, most burglars carry a gun with them. And, ultimately, you need a gun to defend yourself against people who have guns, So if the guns aren't there, then you don't need a gun. But the problem is, there are so many guns in the US, even if you made it illegal to buy more, and you said, look, we need to take back all the guns, and we'll compensate you for anyone who's got a gun. They hand them in, and we'll give you compensation for them. I mean, who are the people who would hand the guns back? They would be the law-abiding citizens, and people who, are more likely to use the gun would be the least likely to hand it back. So I think the real solution to this issue is, first and foremost, they need to change the gun laws, which they could do with a new amendment to the amended constitution. And secondly, they would need to figure out a way of getting rid of all the guns that are already there. I just feel sorry for Canada, frankly, because Canada has such a huge porous border with the US, that they must have a huge number of guns in Canada as well. So anyway, there you are. I've said my piece. I'm still very interested to know about the word of the day.
The word of the day is interminable.
So they need to stop this interminable gun crime.
Yeah, it's meaning having or seeming to have no end. So yeah, you're correct context there. I do need to end the call because my little one's making an awful lot of noise, unfortunately, and I'm not in the office. So, but one of the points you made there, which is about our ability for just huge error, and that's why I'm in favor of gun control. But I do think that there's a lot of hypothetical and philosophical reasons why they have a good point. So I think that the argument for having guns is actually, they do have good arguments in my view, but it's just that the overall outcome of how error prone human beings are, it just overcomes any kind of argument that you might have, just because of our ability to just make huge mistakes, because we're just too flawed to have something which can immediately kill someone. And the example of the girl in the wardrobe and then the person who suddenly got crept up on is an exact example of that. Whereas I do sympathize with the arguments of tyrannical government. You can't control, North Korea can't happen if everyone's armed, and there are some other things that maybe we can get to in another call. But my overall outcome is the same as yours, which is I don't think people should have guns. But there are an awful lot of arguments to say that, like for example, your maid stories. It's far less likely that type of situation would happen if people knew that they were all armed. But
true.
I think with any political type of policy, I think there are going to be, it's the greatest number that you have to think is the most important. And as you have stated, the amount of gun crime is just astronomical. And so there are going to be instances where people will be worse off as a result of not having a gun. But at the same time, because you're talking about policy for millions of people, you have to look at those numbers and say, just objectively, it's going to be better off for the most amount of people if guns aren't available.
Well, you and I, we test things a lot, don't we? I mean, you have an idea, you think, I think this advert will do really well, and you test it, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and you think, oh, I thought that would work, and it didn't. Or I didn't think that would work, and it did as well. But when it comes to looking at statistics and looking at the figures, this completely. I mean, there's been an experiment in the USA for a long time regarding gun ownership, and there is not a shadow of a doubt of the impact that it's had on their culture, and the number of people who've been related in gun incidents and who've been killed by gun-related incidents, rather. So I think you can argue it philosophically and there may be many good arguments one way or the other, but when it comes to the raw data, you cannot just you can't hide the fact that they have by far the highest gun-related murder rate of any civilized country, and in order to get somewhere with a similar kind of rate, you need to go to places like Syria. And that's just not a civilized way of living. So I think that regardless of all the philosophical and various arguments and the rights and wrongs of it all, and the right to be able to defend yourself, which everyone, I've been talking about having the right to defend yourself in your own home earlier on in this very call. So I totally agree with that. But what I do not agree with is the fact that the figures, and the figures are indisputable, and they show clearly that it's a failed experiment. So like any failed experiment, it should be stopped. They should try a different one. But just very briefly, talking about North Korea and things like this, I'd love to touch upon that maybe in our next call. Not necessarily North Korea, but I have a counter argument to that that you mentioned very briefly about, people in America having guns so that a totalitarian regime couldn't take control. And I've there have been experiments on exactly that kind of thing, gun ownership doesn't affect it one way or the other. It's all about the way people perceive things, and it's about it's about, I guess, indoctrination, perception, and what people think is right and wrong. So maybe we could talk about those during our next call. But,
I'm happy to do a if you want to. I didn't really see us as doing this type of experiment, but if you want to, I could take the hypothetical of the other side of the argument. I agree with you, and I don't think people should have guns, but I've heard a lot of debate on it, and I'm happy to have that discussion if you want to.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily about guns, because there's so many people who have talked about this, and it's, what was the word again?
Interminable.
Interminable debate that keeps going on, because ultimately it will go on until the gun laws change. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It will constantly go on because it's doing a great deal of damage. It's like cigarettes, people smoked, and there's no longer any doubt about the fact that cigarettes are bad for your health, and there's a apart from the terrible human impact of it, there's also a massive financial cost to cigarettes, which make it a total false economy. The amount of money that is made by the cigarette companies is paid for by the public in terms of their healthcare for people who've developed, all the kind of side effects. And obviously not everyone who's a smoker develops the side effects, but the numbers of people who smoked, who did develop these side effects, whether they've been, anecdotally linked to their smoking or whether they've been scientifically proven to be because of their smoking, is huge, and the numbers are massive. So nobody really debates that anymore. And until such times as, they stopped smoking, people smoking in public places, in public buildings and things, the debate went on and on and on, and then you rarely hear anyone talking about it now. So I think the same would be for the gun laws. So I'm not necessarily interested in just going over well-trodden path of talking about whether a foreign country that neither of us live in or vote in or anything should or should not change their own gun laws. I don't. I think everyone has an opinion on it, and it seems, to European eyes, it just seems extremely bizarre that they constantly go on about it and don't just change it. But yeah, like you said, there's lots of arguments to and for and against. So I don't really want to talk about that necessarily. But what I would like to talk about is, the other thing that you touched upon, which is the use of using this as a deterrent against regimes such as the one in North Korea from occurring, because I don't think that particular argument's got a leg to stand on, and I'd like to argue that point. Not argue it, but I'd like to explain why maybe next time when we got a bit more time. But because I think it's fascinating.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Just before we forget, though, it comes down to North Korea, actually, or the Korean War, when the American soldiers were being caught, and they were being treated really, really well, and they were kind of brainwashed into, they didn't, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them sort of came round and considered that at the beginning they were sort of die-hard Americans, and they were there to stop communism and all the rest of it. And at the end of it, a lot of them had changed their opinion completely. And it's about sort of mind control, not Darren Brown type mind control, but sort of techniques to sort of change people's opinions and control the way that they think. And I think that, in advertising, in all sorts, this goes on to a lesser or greater extent. So that's the kind of thing that I find very interesting. And if you can change people's opinions and get them round to your side, if they had guns, it could even be a benefit to sort of creating a totalitarian regime as opposed to not to. And there have been a number of experiments, even in the USA, especially in the 1960s, a very famous one, which I'll talk about next time, which sort of proves exactly that point. So yeah, great. I'm looking forward to that one. I think that'll be a good topic. And yeah, I don't think anyone's ever going to get the answers to any of these big, these big ideas from anything that you or I or anyone else says. But I think it's definitely worthwhile getting people to think about them and for us to talk and think about them ourselves. So yeah,
Okay.
great.
All right, mate. Until next time.
Enjoy your day and enjoy your weekend, Tom.
And to you, buddy.
Okay, bye.